Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Fundación Telefónica space. We are going to start the event. I'm Pablo Gonzalo. I'm responsible for the cultural area and the foundation space, and I'm here with Juan Safra, who's Telos magazine manager. And I would like to welcome you and just tell you, between Juan and myself, we're going to give you a bit of a context of what you're going to see today, so there's enough time afterwards for the interesting part, which is the debate that is going to be generated with the guest speakers we have today. At the foundation, we have a goal, which is clear, which is to contribute with our humble effort to have a better world for everyone. It's a simple and ambitious goal, and for us in this digital world, we know that this is done through education, culture, knowledge, and solidarity, because we are firm believers that this future digital world will not be acceptable or realistic or real. We believe if it does not include everyone, and that's what we fight for every day. So within culture and knowledge, which is the scope that I manage and where Telos is, truth to be told, Telos magazine is one of the most important tools and projects. It's a magazine with over 30 years old that 2 years ago had a very important transformation regarding contents and structure and design that multiply, thanks to that transformation, times 5 the number of readers. So we are very proud of that, and also very thankful, because you readers and people who come to these events are the reason why the magazine exists. And today we are especially happy because we start a new step, a new tool within this ecosystem of knowledge in which Telos magazine has transformed, which are Telos forums. These forums are going to be meetings that we're going to have yearly. We'll start with this one that we call Homo Digitalis, and it's 4 meetings where there's a conducting theme that will be to debate and to think about, as you will see, how technology is affecting people and how we transform amongst ourselves. We are going to have 4 interesting events. We started with the first one yesterday, where we have Saskia Sachin and Cardio Brotin, who talked about cities of the future and how technology is helping us to understand these cities and to try and make them more human and more inclusive. Today we have the meeting, which is humans and digitals, with 2 people of the highest level, who is Anders Sandberg, who was yesterday with us as within the public, and Juan Luis Arsuaga, and we were delighted to have him again. He already became a friend, and also with Marta G, who's going to help us to set the debate, and I would like to thank her presence as well. The third event that we will have will be about human creativity and the role of human creativity in this world dominated by machines. And the fourth event will have Jared Diamond, who will tell us about upcoming crisis on the future, which we don't know if will be dystopic or utopic, and how those crises will be, and how we can get prepared to tackle that. I think these are really amazing subjects. I hope they're all interesting to you and that they will generate debates in these meetings and beyond these meetings. And that's all for me. I would like to thank you again, your presence here. I would like to thank the speakers we have today and the rest of the speakers that we will have on the forums, their presence, and also to thank the whole team from the magazine and the cultural area for all the effort they make for this event, and Juan as a magazine manager, because he's going to tell us now how everything is. He's going to explain it in a more down-to-earth version. So thank you so much. I just have words to thank Fundación Telefónica, Pablo's team and speakers, and who are part of the Telos community, and this is the evidence of what we wanted. We always said Telos is not a magazine, is a community of knowledge, an open community with collective intelligence, understanding intelligence as a tool that would help us make decisions, and that's what we try and do in a magazine, to perform analysis and perspective of the moment where we are living and what we are building for the immediate future. In one of our presentations, the notebook devoted to geotechnology, Fernando Balestin, who's a good friend, politologist, professor, detected immediately and identified us as optimists and techno-humanists, or humanists who are optimists. So we are on the activism. Telos communities on the activism in favor of a better future. But otherwise, what future are we building? Our motto is, and you probably heard it quite often, what you cannot dream, you cannot build. And when you don't start building, you will never accomplish. So that's what we try and do at Telos every day. By just being not only detected us, but inspire us to have a series that will go further to non-wanting dystopic photography that has imposed on the public opinion, TV platforms, TV series, and so much literature. And he said, why don't you have a series? So we are starting with a series of debates that will continue, and that's not a little achievement. And with people and analysts that the ones as we have today and we had yesterday. Yesterday, as Pablo was saying, we had a debate devoted to being, how we are in the world, cities and sustainable cities. And today we are going to have it devoted to the being, how technology, science has transformed, has historically transformed, and we have great experts about it, has transformed the place where humans have in the world and how humans are in the world. And the challenge that we have is for you to help us to draw how we will be on the near future. That's the essence of Telos. The first notebook of this phase is for the digital human, and it's today what we're going to do. And second is ethos about technology and time. The time of Telos right now is the one of singularity, understood as technological and scientific progress convergent, accelerated, that it also, and we should not forget about this, as compared with those dystopic photographs, and Arsuaga will tell us about that technological and scientific progress which is made by humans. It's not a product of some advent foreign to us, and how we will use the tools and how we will form this present and near future world. We were also talking in a different notebook about the fight to conquest technological and scientific leadership. We talked about the brain and the importance of the brain, and we have a neuroscientist who's a relevant one, and we talk about the voice, how voice gets us closer. And you have hard copies over there, but I will remind you that we publish Telos on a hard copy 3 times per year. But the most important thing is that we are on the website, updating the website with 2 articles every week, and then there's a permanent call to corporations to share knowledge, visions about the world we live in. And that's about it. I'm going to give the floor now Marta Garcia, who's going to manage this. We have a humanist, we have a paleontologist, and we have a communicator who wrote about the end of the world. And I believe that with that dystopic image that they want to impose, is the only one who is right. The end of the world as we know it. That's a book. You have the floor.
Pues muchas gracias a los dos, muchas gracias.
Thank you both, thank you all for being here. I guess you come because you're interested about the future, and that's for sure. And that's something that we are all interested about. And as the future doesn't exist yet, the most we can say is to imagine it. And for that, I think it's a privilege to have a neuroscientist, an expert in artificial intelligence, someone who works every day to provide shape to that future, and a paleontologist, an expert on human behavior for hundreds of thousands of years. Juan Luis' experiences is not of hundreds of thousands of years, but the space of history is as broad as, and we can learn from it, and we can start in the Museum of Evolution, and I will tell you about. I'm not going to talk a lot, because of the most interesting, it will be the conversation afterwards, and we can get many ideas of what is going to happen in the next few years, next few decades. Fascinating decades that will be for sure digital and for sure human as well. That's why I think it's important that both disciplines should go together, and doubts should go together, and questions about the world we are starting to shape out, the world of the 21st century we have. So without further ado, we're going to hear Anders Sandberg. He's a PhD in computational neuroscience by the University of Stockholm. I will have to say that he has a pin that says that you have to be optimistic. It's quite a statement, and it's on his echo, so I'll translate it. And he develops his research in the Future of Humanity Institute from the University of Oxford, a fascinating center that I would love to know. I would like to say that already in case there's someone. And his focus on social questions and lessons around human progress and new technologies and the scientific future of technology. But he studied neural networks and the most technological part of artificial intelligence development, and not the philosophical part. That's why his vision is quite important. He tackles things as public policies, neuroethos, collective intelligence, and he is co-founder of Orion's Arm, a transhumanistic fictional global cooperation project that I hope he has the opportunity to tell you in this 20 minutes talk, and then we'll listen to Juan Luis, and then we'll have the dialogue. So thank you, and without further ado, let's have Anders.
Thank you so much for those kind words. As you can see, I'm already a cyborg. I'm equipped with a lot of technology here. But being a computer scientist by training, I also don't trust computers with my speech. So when I start my story, I would like to get in on a little bit of etymology. That word, digitalis, digital, where does it come from? And as probably most of you know, it's of course from digit, fingers, because we used to count on our fingers. And I'm going to return to this, but I find it something fascinating about what we're doing when we're counting 1, 2, 3, 4 on our fingers, because we're both doing a process in our minds and using our bodies, but we're also externalizing a small part of our minds in order to perform arithmetic. And I'm going to return to this theme, how we are mixing ourselves into our environment, how we're putting parts of our minds out there, and how part of the environment, of course, are affecting our minds. So normally when I talk about transhumanism and the future of humanity, I tend to start with my standard story. I show a slide showing some chimpanzees, and our mutual ancestors, maybe 6 or 7 million years ago, they were living very much like the chimpanzees do today. And then I tell the evolutionary story about humanity. But we have a much better expert here, so I'm going to cut that part short. But the basic story is, the chimpanzees are still in the forest. They're still living like their ancestors, hiding from predators, hunting and gathering, very simple things. Meanwhile, the relatives, the hairless apes, the humans, are everywhere else. And the forests are getting small, there are metal birds flying in the sky, and because of hairless apes with sticks that go bang, there are rather few predators around. And indeed, the chimpanzees don't even really know this, but their fate is in our hands, which should fill them with dread, of course, but they don't even know that. Because the difference here between a chimpanzee brain and a human brain is not terribly large from a neuroscientist perspective. Indeed, if you were to look at them, the only thing that would be obvious is the difference in size, but that's not the important part. All the same structures and systems are there, but they function slightly differently, and that little difference makes all the difference. Because we humans have something chimpanzees don't have, and that is an accumulative culture. We have an ability to think about things that are not present. And then we can also use our open-ended language to talk about it, to tell each other about the dream we have about the future, or the dreadful possibility that could happen, or maybe how we go about hunting. So we can coordinate larger teams, and we can tell stories and myths about what our ancestors did, and they can be remembered much longer than we live, which means that the tribe can amass knowledge and become more powerful, learn how to use new tools. We certainly seem to have a knack for understanding physics and making simple tools compared to many apes. But generally, it's our ability to remember the tools, not just make a tool and bring it with us, but also to remember how to do it and explain to the kids, this is how you make a good stone axe, means that we're getting better and better stone axes. And then agriculture, and then cities, and then people who don't have to work all day to get the food, so they can spend the time inventing writing and writing religious books or checking the stars or doing alchemy, and suddenly, before you know it, you have the flying metal birds, mushroom clouds, and humans setting footprints on the moon. And this is a very rapid process. Evolution takes millions of years to generate a new species, but only a few tens of thousands of years, we were still living almost like our ancestors in the forest did. And then we took over the world. This has been great for us. We are a very successful species. We're one of the most common large mammals on Earth. In fact, we are fixating as much nitrogen using our technological processes as the rest of the biosphere together. We're also changing the atmospheric composition, which is a less good thing. We're one of the major forces breaking down rock. I think we're almost past the ability of nature to break down rock right now, because we want gravel for building buildings, making tunnels and so on. So we're a major force. However, we're also in trouble, because although it's pretty unlikely that we would die out and go extinct from a natural reason, there are certainly dangers in nature, like supervolcanoes and supernovas, but they are very rare. The biggest threat to humanity is, of course, humanity itself. We know how to split atoms. We know how to make dangerous technologies. And here comes the interesting part. We are aware that we're in trouble. This is very different from many other species. They are not aware that they are a species, and maybe that they could also be in trouble. So this is the wonder and horror of us being self-aware, reflective. We can notice that, oh, there is a problem here. We need to fix it. And we can dream about solutions, but we can also fail at achieving solutions. And we can realize that we can struggle and fail, which is even more dreadful. But, as was mentioned, I'm an optimist. I think we can handle a lot of this. Because, as I said, we are the only species aware that, oh, we're doing ecological damage. We ought to stop somehow. And this is why we do a lot of research at my institute about existential threats to humanity. We want to figure out a way of reducing the risk. Because if we survive and get our act together, the future looks very glorious. But this also happens on an individual level. All of us must confront that we're mortal when we're kids. And we find a way of handling it. Religion, maybe existentialism, maybe let's get engaged with life and not think too much about it. But of course, because we can imagine things being differently, we quite often imagine, what if we didn't have to age and die? The ancient Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh, is half of it is all about King Gilgamesh's search for the herb of immortality. Maybe there was something you could eat that made you immortal. And of course, because there wasn't anything practical for the Sumerians to do to become immortal, the epic ends, of course, with a story about how Snake steals the herb, and King Gilgamesh has to accept that he's mortal. The interesting thing is, however, this drive to change the human condition, transhumanism, has been with us ever since. And of course, we are getting better at changing the human condition. We certainly aren't immortal anymore, but it's worth noticing that over the 20th century, we doubled the lifespan in many countries. That's already a radical change. And we did that using fairly basic healthcare, refrigerators, vaccines, antibiotics. And now in the lab, people are working on other ways that actually intervene directly in the aging process. Of course, being able to envision things that have not happened yet also makes many people come up with ways this could go badly wrong. What if we get a society where we're all immortal and bored? What if we get a society where bad rulers rule forever? So many of them come up with these scenarios, which is again a good idea to think, well, how do I distribute the immortality? How do I make sure that my life is meaningful? How do we actually organize societies so bad rulers don't remain forever and ever? So I'm involved in thinking a lot about how different technologies change the human condition. So I already mentioned that we might be able to intervene in the aging process using gene therapy. I know a lady who literally done do-it-yourself gene therapy to slow down her aging. So far, so good. We don't know whether she's aging any slower, but she at least haven't had any bad side effects. My own research has been dealing with ways of improving the brain, because we can improve the brain not just by teaching and learning and mental techniques like the ars memoriam of antiquity, but also by smart drugs. At least for particular tasks we can focus better or stay more alert. It doesn't generally improve intelligence, unfortunately, because intelligence is a top-level phenomenon that turns out to be rather hard to improve. There are other interesting things about gene therapy and technologies. But in this talk, I'm going to focus a little bit about how we're mixing ourselves with machines. The most obvious thing is, of course, brain-computer implants. So there is a fair number of patients who already have brain pacemakers that help stimulate a part of the brain that needs help. This is mostly useful for Parkinson's disease, but people are trying it out for depression and some other disorder. The disturbing thing for me is that these devices have Wi-Fi, but no passwords. They have bad computer security. I wouldn't want something with no password connected to my brain. We need to fix that. And it's a beautiful demonstration that we can do amazing technology, yet miss out on something very simple and stupid. Other people are working better on electrode arrays that can take signals from the brain to control prosthetic limbs for paralyzed people or allow people who cannot speak to speak again. It's still very crude because the brain is a very fine web of connections and we have very crude electrodes. We have very crude means of getting there, but we're improving this at a steady rate. Some people envision that in the future we're going to merge with the machine, whatever that means. In practice, knowing how hard it is to do good medical engineering, that's going to take a while. But of course, we are merging with our machines in other ways. After all, most of us probably spend our days going around with our smartphones. We're already half merged with these devices. And I don't just mean it in a metaphorical sense. I think we actually partially put our minds into these things. So there is some hypothesis in philosophy, the extended mind hypothesis, that we are placing part of our cognition outside. The traditional idea is Otto, who's got Alzheimer's, but he always writes down what he wants to do and how to do it in his notebook. So when he needs to do something, he looks it up. And then David Chalmers and Andy Clark, the philosophers who came up with this, argue that Otto should regard his notebook as part of his mind, because it's doing the same job as his normal biological memory would be doing in a normal person. I had my Otto experience when I was attending a conference in China a few years back. Suddenly, I found Wikipedia censored, and I became aware that I was unknowingly accessing Wikipedia all the time. I thought I was sitting there writing emails and academic texts, but my left hand was Googling things and looking it up in Wikipedia. But suddenly it failed because there was the censorship page. So I became aware that many of the things I believed I knew, that was in Wikipedia. Part of my mind or part of my memory appears to be in Wikipedia, which is a bit disturbing when you think about not just that it can be censored, but it's written by a lot of editors out there and they can quarrel about what I should be remembering. So I call this an exoself, an extended self, and we do it quite a bit. So the term exoself is from Greg Egan's science fiction story, Permutation City, where he's talking about things that you connect to your mind and to extend it. But it's been used even outside science fiction to denote things we can do to extend ourselves. And our normal sense of self is pretty diffuse. So my body ends at my skin, except of course I get very embarrassed if somebody starts stroking my clothes. They have temporarily become part of my body. And I'm rather cautious about my reputation. It's not my biological body, but if my reputation were harmed, in some sense I would be harmed. I regard that as important. And certainly my bank account, yeah, it's not exactly me, but it's rather important to me. So this was something William James already pointed out, that the difference between me and mine is rather small. And Sigmund Freud famously pointed out that we're actually using a lot of technology as prosthetics. We're extending our body. Clothes are in some sense an extra skin that gives us extra abilities. But they also naturally become part of it, because our brains are wired. They don't know from the start what kind of body they're in. They just figure it out from the signals. So if I were to have a long rod and were to touch things at a remote distance, if you did a brain scan, you would see that my representation of space would change. My egocentric space, the space I feel I'm in, would be expanded because I have a long rod. If I'm driving, to some extent, my car becomes my body. Not exactly my body, but our brains are built to extend themselves to the body, and we can use tools to do this. When you're very used to a very good tool, it becomes part of you. And you can actually see this in brain scans. You see representations showing up when you deal with tools. In fact, there are mirror neurons that react to when I do a certain action, but also when I see others do the same action. And it seems like we're getting the same thing for tools. We extend ourselves into it. One of the most profound philosophical experiments you can do is take a pen and touch a surface. And think about, where does it feel that you touched the surface? What I actually feel is, of course, vibrations in my fingertips. But it feels like I was touching at the nib of a pen. This is how our brains expand themselves into space. And then we can use technology to do it. For example, we can add a watch. Watches are interesting little things. They started out as fashion accessories. Then they became very manly during the First World War because they helped coordinate soldiers. Suddenly a team of soldiers could act at the same time without talking to each other. And after the war, they became very important that we should all have watches, which they also synchronize us across society. And you actually become more punctual by having a watch, even if you don't look at it. Just the feeling of a watch makes you punctual. And this way, we create these tools that extend us. In some sense, our clocks are a collective timekeeping, just like a vaccination is a collective immune system. And we can, of course, do high-tech things too. Exoskeletons, for example, extend our physical abilities. Military forces around the world have been very interested in adding extra skeletons with extra muscles that can move things, so soldiers don't need to use their own muscles. In some cases, of course, you want fine precision, so we make regulators. I put my hand into a regulator that is connected to a fine manipulator, for example, for surgery. I have been involved in working on wearable computers, where the idea is instead you have a display that you see in your glasses and give you information about the world. And the vision back in the 90s when we were working on this was you want to have the same computer all the time, so you learn how to use it and it learns from you, and together you form a feedback loop. So there was, for example, a software called the Remembrance Agent, a little bit of a Google for all your files. And the idea would be that I'm writing something and it reminds me about similar things I have been reading or emails from years ago. It would be extending my mind. And the vision was we can use this one to create a collective memory for a research group or a team working together. The funniest part about this was, of course, in the 90s, we were feeling very happy. We're doing cutting-edge research. But you could almost find these ideas, quote, line by line, similar in the 1960s in research that led to the development of the personal computer. Again, the idea was to extend our minds. And that in turn came back to Vannevar Bush's work in the 1940s, where he was thinking about electromechanical computers to try to extend our cognition. Now, many of these tools we carry around also have a disciplining effect. They're cybernetic tools. Think about Fitbit and other exercise monitors. What do they do? If you have walked 10,000 steps, they bleep or vibrate, and you feel very happy. This is just like Pavlov's dogs, or rather Skinner's pigeons, in the operant conditioning. I walk, it counts my steps, And eventually, at a certain point, it sends me a signal, and I feel very happy because I achieved a fitness goal. I'm rewarding myself thanks to a little external device. And it's a very strange thing, of course, because some people feel that they need to walk extra much because otherwise they haven't fulfilled it. They really crave to get that little signal. It gets very scary when your insurance company has access to your fitness tracker and demands that you exercise. So some people have invented little cradles to put the tracker in and swing it back and forth to fool the insurance companies. Other people feel naked without their fitness trackers, or feel dread that, oh, I need to fulfill my obligation for my exercise. The problem here is, of course, that it's a too stupid feedback loop to be truly humanistic. When we exercise, we ideally should do that because we want to be healthy. That's a sensible goal. But quite often, instead, we start exercising because we want the fitness tracker to beep. And this is, of course, the interesting problem. We want to construct technologies that actually makes it better to be a human, that allows to be more human. But it's easy to make rather controlling devices because they're simple. Making a system that learns our habits and helps us develop them, that's complicated and hard. Making a system that learns about us and sends us advertisements, that's much easier and you make much more money from it. So we have an interesting challenge here as technologists, I think, to come up with better forms of humanistic computing. It's also interesting that these visions, of course, are strongly tied both on ideas of bettering oneself. My fitness tracker should help me exercise more. I certainly need that. But it's also a part of a vision of a transhuman future. We might envision a future where we actually do solve some of the awkward things about biology, like aging, like forgetfulness. But there is also an element of collective enhancement. Wikipedia is a beautiful artifact. It's one of the most wonderful things humanity has ever created. People coming together collectively to gather the information. Not always agreeing, not always producing the best result, but it's still amazing. And we might want to use this technology to get these collective things. Now, I don't have the time to get into some of my other research about how to, can we copy our brains into computers? What about artificial intelligence? How worried should we be about the singularity? But I want to bring up this interesting problem that we are already digital in a sense. We have already placed a lot of our minds out there in the virtual world by projecting them. And also, we have this vision. We can again envision getting rid of all the bad stuff about our bodies. And many of my friends are cyber gnostics. They're kind of hoping to one day become pure information, free of all those boring, annoying things. The problem is, the bad news is, of course, you can never get rid of your body. Because the body is the interface of your mind to the outside world. And even if you have been uploaded into a computer and exists as pure software, that software needs to talk to the internet and all the other systems in a useful way. That's going to be your body, even if it's a virtual body. But conversely, information is physical. Information is never pure. Information is always embodied in matter and energy. And that is, of course, oh, yes, the recalcitrance of matter. And that is, of course, the amazing thing. Our minds are great. But we cannot predict the consequences of our actions because we're much smaller minds than the rest of the universe. Although my mind is not bad at calculating physics, it was not thinking about the physical consequences of that action. Just as collectively, we have, up until very recently, not been aware of the collective effects on the environment or other things. So the interesting thing here is, of course, that the human condition is to be mixed up with the world. And we are getting better and better at mixing ourselves using high-tech, but also the simple low-tech things like pen and paper, which is already, in many ways, mediating our interaction with the world. We are similarly also living in a world of visions, our imagined futures. And neither of these ones are perfect. They quite often mislead us. But I think we can make them much better. We should make them much better. We have a duty to make them much better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anders. Muchísimas gracias. Vamos ahora.
We are now going to listen Juan Luis Arsuaga. I'm sure that you all know him. He's a PhD in biological science by the Complutense University. He managed the Center of Evolution and Human Behaviors at this university. He's a professor at the paleontology department at the Faculty of Geological Science, and for sure you know him better because he's the scientific director of the Human Evolution Museum in Burgos, where I have one of the most amazing traveling into the future, from the beginning of humanity all the way through Darwin's boat to where we are going. So traveling to the future through what history teaches us is fascinating, and I really want to do it again, listening to Juan Luis, and then we'll go to the dialogue between Anders and Juan Luis, who will be very interesting. So Juan Luis, you have the floor.
Bueno, pues no voy a hablar de...
I'm not going to talk about fossils, although it's true that I work in an evolution and human behavior center. And when I tell people about the name of the research center, they say that it may be something about NASA or CIA, because it sounds very futuristic, like Evolution and Human Behavior Center. And I'm not going to talk about, but I'm not opposed. First, I'm going to do a statement of principles. I'm old enough not to be against any technology that will improve my quality of life. Therefore, anything that will allow me to maintain or recover for my teeth, if possible, with no pain or side or the bodily functions in general, I agree. Obviously, I'm not against any medicinal use or therapeutical use, of course, of medicine. And obviously, I'm happy that science allows us not to see our kids die, so infant mortality has nearly disappeared. So obviously, I'm not opposed to that. And of course, I'm happy and I enjoy and I participate on technology development that has changed our lives since Sumerians learned and created external memory systems outside of the brain, way of preserving information outside of the human brain in parts of cooked boil. We have technology of accumulation of technology outside our brains with fire clay, and it's outside, it's not biologic. And we enjoy technological progresses that, of course, would at least, or that's what we hope, would make our life better. So I don't disagree with any of that, but for a biologist, when you talk about changes in the human being, for an evolution biologist, even more, what we think is about genetic engineering. And that's what we are interested about this debate. Use of exoskeletons is great. I managed to came here. As a matter of fact, I came in a vehicle, an automobile. I could have used a motorbike, but that does not change my nature. The only thing that can change human nature is genetic engineering. And against that, or about that, I would like to talk about genetic modification, about an evolution or artificial selection of human being, of controlled evolution, because of something which is purely philosophical, which is that I'm opposed to change human genetics, because we have no ideal model of a human being. We just have, just a sick brain may think that there is an ideal human and want to be able to propose to manufacture one. Humans are fine the way they are. We are all different. Each of us has its own gifts, and it's very well distributed in general, those gifts. So it's pathological to think about creating through science something like a model of a perfect human. And that, it was already mentioned in the previous century, some ideologies of which we would like not to have any news about. So there's nothing new about it, of this perfect human, of this improved human, of this modified human, brings historic memories that are not pleasant. So I'd like to talk about that a bit, but not about exoskeletons or use of computers or technologies or medicine, because we all find that fine, but I don't believe that will be the debate. So I'm going to talk about a few aspects that are related to what is understood as the human of the future. A human of the future is something different, theoretically, of what we are now, and created by not the strength of nature, but technology developed by scientists. So I'm not going to talk about fossils today. There will be other opportunities. But I will talk about present and the future. A bit about the past, but a close past. And that is still ongoing. So I will start with this image of a beautiful young lady with an old person. I'm not going to tell who they are, but I notice the image because I will end with this. I'm going to talk about this writer who's Aldous Huxley, who wrote a dystopy. That is a society in the future that is not the one we want. One of the questions that alters me most, and they ask me quite frequently, is how will be the human species in the future? Any question that is thought like that, how the future will be, includes a renounce by the one who's asking the question on how the future will be built. Because when you ask how the future will be, it's understood that you are just a spectator, that you are passive about this. So the question could be translated as what future are they going to build to us, or are they going to impose to us? The right question is, how do we want the future to be? Because at least I will participate in building the future. So the question on how will the human of the future be is, I don't know. It depends on how we behave and what we decide. But my ideal of a future is a free society that will decide democratically how the future is, and not a society where someone will impose the future to most of humanity. So the question, let's start by changing the question on what the future will be and how we want the future to be. Regarding the human being, personally, I don't have an ideal, a paradigm or model of a human being. Then I'm not thinking on how I want a human being to be. I think it's fine the way it is. The ones having the experience of being a father, and I have my daughter here, we know that there's not an ideal son or daughter. If you would ask, how do you want your daughter to be? Tall, short, blonde, brunette? I say, I don't know. I don't have a model of a daughter. So fortunately, I don't have the ability to design my sons and daughters, my children. But if I were able to do it, I don't have a model for that. And that's what happens in general with human beings. And I'm worried about the ones who say that they have a model of a human being, because I don't know how they reach that model and what's the criteria for that, except if the model for the human being they're thinking about is a more tolerant, more generous human, more respectful, with more solidarity. Because if that's the model of a human being that we propose to build, then we don't need biology or genetic engineering. We just need education and human behavior. Nevertheless, Aldous Huxley wrote a book which is a dystopy, which is called Brave New World, of which you probably heard about or read. And it's quite surprising. It's a quite recommended reading, because you will notice that many of the elements in that dystopy, of that unwanted world that he would present as a possibility, unwanted possibility that he would not expect to happen, is already happening. So some of the worst forecast from the Brave New World have happened. But he wrote another book which is less known, which is After Many a Summer Dies the Swan, of which I would like to talk about, and nearly no one knows about it, and it has a lot to do with biology. It's difficult to translate into Spanish, so let's just say that the swan dies, and we'll solve the problem, because it's a poem. Actually, it's the title of a poem from Tennyson I will talk about. So it's a poetic language which is difficult to translate, so it just says dies the swan. So Aldous Huxley was thinking about this when he wrote Dies the Swan. So his idea was a scientific theory that back in the day was quite fashionable, which is the Newtonian one, which is about the following. If we compare a adult human being, I don't know, okay, we compare an adult human being over there, the index finger never always works, with a child human, and we compare, I don't know, a grown rabbit with a young rabbit, and we compare an old dog with a young dog, and we compare a grown-up chicken with a young chicken, and we see the development of the chimpanzee and how human development is on the skull, and we see an adult, a grown-up, and a young. It's surprising how similar is the child chimpanzee. Looks like a small, like a little man. So the task of Newton is that the human being is a species that has not yet completed its development. So we are eternally young, eternally a kid. We are a species that has not yet fulfilled its development, and that's why we are similar to the youngest of our closest mates that has developed more as we stay on a simple place. So the Newtonian theory says that there is an amazing similarity between a baby chimpanzee and a grown-up human. So what's going on here? Because a baby chimpanzee has many similar features with any baby from any species, not with the grown-ups, but with the babies, and we are similar to the baby chimpanzee and probably to the baby of Australopithecus or a baby of our forefathers. It's like we maintain some grown-up aspect, but we maintain an aspect with like baby psychology. And as it was said back in the day, or an author back in the day say, was not a scientist, but a religious leader who said that if you were not like it, you will not get into the kingdom of heaven. And it was not a science who said that. And we have similar things in our anatomy. History of After Many a Summer Dies the Swan is a brother of Aldous Huxley there. Huxley had a brother who was a important scientist, a biologist, who was Julian Huxley. And Julian Huxley, who's one of the big evolutionary biologists from the last century, studied these Mexican amphibians that does not is an axolotl, and it always look like a baby axolotl. It doesn't become a grown-up, and it even have gills, external gills, and it's always like a baby before metamorphosis, like an infant, and it reaches reproductive maturity, so it can be a grown-up in the sense of being able to have sexual maturity. An individual may develop their gonads and reproduce without having a morphology and behavior and physiology like child-like. So Julian Huxley they discover axolotls in what is currently Mexico DF, and they had him brought to the laboratory, which is what happens here in this comic book. It's Julian Huxley studying axolotls and imagining how neotechnics works. Let's go back to his brother Aldous. And the story After Many a Summer Dies the Swan, which is a story of the multimillionaire who wants to be immortal. That is, he wants to live forever. And in order to do so, he would hire some researchers, and the main character of the novel is a hard researcher, an expert about all these development things. And he joins the team, and there's a number of things that happen. And finally he managed to see the millionaire, and he finds out that the millionaire is 300 years old, meaning that the individual who started that research project is already, he discovers as a surprise, because he managed to be immortal already, or to get close to it, because he's already 300 years old when he manages to access where the millionaire is, and he finds out that he's an orangutan. Why? Because by prolonging life, what happened is that he fulfilled the development. So a human being, which is a neoteny, as according to the days of back in the day, that was always young, if life would prolong, the development will fulfill, and he will become an orangutan. This is not this rigorous from the scientific point of view, so don't think this is what is going to happen, but keep in mind the metaphor of the dangers of dreaming with things that, with manipulation, with genetic modification, with changes in human nature. Here we have another thing that is on my brief, which is a mole rat, which is a rodent living in South Africa. It's a naked mole, and it looks like a baby mole. It looks like that forever. It's like a fetus, like just born, and it has a really long life. As a matter of fact, they're potentially immortal. We don't know any degenerative diseases in these animals or cardiovascular diseases, and people say that a naked mole can live if it's eaten by a predator or any other thing like that happens, but they are potentially immortal. The price they pay is that they look like that. That is, a naked mole is the equivalent to a adult fetus that we would be according to the theory of neoteny. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning, and let's go back to the title of the novel, which was After Many a Summer Dies the Swan, which is a poem from Lord Tennyson, and the poem is called Tithonus, which is Titon in Spanish, which is a Greek mythological character, and it says as follows, and that's from Wikipedia. In Greek mythology, he was immortal, as Ganymedes was an amazing beauty, very beautiful kid, Titan, and a god Eos, which was, the goddess was in love. So this same Eos asked Zeus to grant immortal to his love Tithonus, and the father of the gods accepted that, but the goddess forgot to ask for eternal youth. Therefore, Tithonus was older and older until he became So when it wakes up in the morning, it was a grasshopper, and when it wakes up in the morning, produces dew with its tears. So when you see dew on a mist on a morning, you know that it's Aurora crying because of his loved one, Tithonus, who eats that, according to the old belief. And when he asks, what do you want? He answers in Latin, Mori, 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 I want to die. So this is the dream of reason. And here we have Tithonus. So let's be careful with dreams, because it may become a nightmare, and this is a thought for transhumanism. And let me tell you about another story. This is a newer story, and this story has to do with some current books, like this one from Harari, where it says openly that in the future there will be two types of human beings: genetically modified human beings, which will be the ones that genetically improved, that will be the ones that could handle machines and compete with artificial intelligence, and everybody else will be irrelevant human beings participating in nothing, and luckily enough they will be allowed to live and to eat pizza and watch football and stuff like that. So the brave new world, they will be entertained, but they will be irrelevant. So that's something that you may read about in Deus' book, which sold 12 million copies. So I'm not talking about something announced or proposing a future for our children. I'm not talking about a movie, I'm talking about my kids. But there will be a few superhuman individuals, genetically improved, who will be the masters, while everybody else is garbage. And that's something that happens with no scandal whatsoever. No one was scandalous about this. I think it was the only one. And it's openly talked about in a book that has sold millions of copies, and people read about this and they say, of course, of course. I read and I say, no, don't count me in. I have Stephen Coppens, who published posthumously a book, Brief Answers to Big Questions. I don't know up to what point he was the author of what I'm going to say afterwards, but he thinks about the futures like Harari's. Even more, he says something that is surprising for me. Stephen Hopkins says that there will be genetically improved human beings, not with better computers, which I would think is bad. But just think about it further to biology. Imagine they would say that there will be some individuals that will get a better education, they will talk more languages, they will have better computers, better technology, and they will be richer, and they will be the ones in charge. And everybody else, most of us, will have worse education, less technology, will live worst, and will be the ones obeying. That would be something to be a scandal without including genetic modification. Just that lack of equality will be terrifying for us, and he says that that is what's going to happen. And the interesting thing, there's a sentence that you can read in his book, is that he's saying, I'm not saying that that's it what I would like to happen, I'm saying that that is what will happen. When I read that, I closed the book and I said, well, that would be if I allow it, that will happen if we allow it. I don't see any reason for which that has to happen. There are other ideas which are better, more tolerant, more just, more egalitarian, more respectful society, happier society. So you have alternatives for that. Nevertheless, Hopkins talks about a dystopic world as well that has no answer in society, and that's what he raises. This is Julian Huxley, Aldous' brother, the one of the Oxytles, with a very complex personality in many sense. He did many good things. For instance, he's one of the founders of WWF, Worldwide Fauna, and UNESCO. I think he was also president of UNESCO. So he did many things, but he was also of the Eugenesic Society. Eugenesics consists on, as it says there, let's take control of human evolution. From now on, we are going to say how human evolution is going to be. How back in the day when genetic engineers were not conceived, how can we control human evolution through reproduction? Meaning eugenics is to decide who is going to be has a reproductive capacity according to an ideal thing. We scientists, according to this program, eugenics, will choose best reproductives from our species, the male ones with the most genetic quality for the next generation, for mating, for mating. And that's the social program of eugenics, where Julian Huxley, Aldous brothers participated. Aldous made all those ideas into this topic of Brave New World as a possible world, but unacceptable. And Julian was serious about this, like a real possibility. Here you have another character, and I'm going to end so we can have the debate. But it's a fascinating person who's Hermann Müller. Hermann Müller is a geneticist who got the Nobel Award, the Nobel Prize, a very kind person. And he was here in the Spanish Civil War. He was here in Madrid, here like right really close to here. He was also in Moscow first. He was quite a communist, so he went to Moscow first, right on the Stalinism period. He was not friends with Stalin, and he has to flee, and he came to Moscow, and he joined Thomas Bethune, who was a Canadian, French-Canadian fellow who created the hematology unit for blood transfusion in 1937 here in Madrid. And they created a hematology institute, and they thought about the possibility of transfusing dead people blood into live people. It was the moment of the Battle of Jarama and many other battles that produced many injured people, and that institute of hematology was installed here, really nearby at Príncipe de Vergara, in a building that is still existing. You have Bethune, you have Müller, Grande Covian, who was a Spanish one, and other people from the time. And Hermann Müller was also in favor of eugenics, and he wrote a book which is called Out of the Night, from which Huxley professor, who is also here in Madrid in those days, because he was also in the Republic Support Committee, he wrote that it was a wonderful book. And here we have a note about the book that says Müller is favor of separating love from mating. So I may love my wife a lot, maybe I'm not the chosen one to mate with her, and neither my wife. Or maybe my wife is chosen and I'm not chosen. So one thing is love, and a different thing is who is going to produce the improved next generation of Spanish people or people from Madrid. And he said that you have to split that and separate that. And the pure Müller was said, this is impossible in a democracy like the one from the US, because the idea of who's better from the genetic point of view will favor people like Billy Sanders, Baby Ruth, we don't know him, Rodolfo Valentino, Jack Telsey, who was a boxing world champion, and even Al Capone. If you allow people to choose, they will choose artists, rock stars, footballers. People has no criteria whatsoever. That's what he was saying. So only in a socialist, integrated socialist country, progressive eugenics should be practiced in order to produce higher human beings. So all totalitarian societies at the end of the day decide creating control systems to produce from education or from genetics or whatever, what they consider is an ideal human being according to their own criteria. By the way, that it usually happens that the paradigm of perfect model is quite similar to the ones who are choosing eugenics. No one says, no, it would not be me. So this Hermann Müller, and this book Out of the Night says, and I would ask you, what woman would not want to have children from Lenin? Would not want to have a child from Lenin. And this was serious. There was, publics for real. And these are dystopias that produce dreams of reason. But here we have for everyone. So here we can have a debate for everything. So in all these of the human of the future, or transhumanism, or future technology, I see a magic thinking. So at the end of the day, it's a religious thought. Is to provide some kind of, using miracles of science, to provide some hope of a wonderful world, better world for all poor humans. So at the end of the day, there's a magic thought behind all this. We are appealing to what we want, to our desires, and to promise wonderful worlds, because the human being has the need of transcendence, has the need of imagining a world that is ideal, perfect. And it's the promise of the magic world, of the religious thinking. And that's what I see in this magic religious component. Therefore, and I'm finishing, I will take Jacques Monod and the title has already in it. I kept Lucreti, Democrito, and the awful sentence of Monod when he says at the end of the book that the human being has come in the indifferent immensity. That's the worst word, an indifferent universe. So its duty is not written down anywhere, as its destiny is not. And the final sentence that is missing, that is not there, which says it can choose between the best and the worst, in just a few words. So this is what I call grown-up mentality. When you get maturity and responsibility, there are no more promises, there are no more magic thoughts, no more paradise, no more utopias. Let's be grown-ups, let's be responsible, let's face our problems, and let's propose to create with our own strength, with no miracles, a better, fair, more fair world. We can do that. We don't need miracles. We don't need wonders of technologies to do that. We just need our will and our ethos. Thank you.
Nos van a poner ahora las...
Well, we'll start some debate now, and I'd like to tell you, if you want to send some questions on the social networks on Twitter with hashtag Foro Telos, we can read them here for our experts today. Okay, you can take a seat.
Para empezar la conversación en la que va a haber...
So we'll start a conversation with lots of debate, because these two presentations have been very different, and also the notes that I saw Anders taking while Juan Luis was speaking. So I want to start with a question. When Juan Luis said that this future that we cannot imagine, or we should not want, with a group of privileged people that have access to better health system, better education, better means of production. So I thought, is this the history, the real history of humankind? Because there are always been these advantaged groups. Yes, but we don't like it. We don't propose this.
So what's interesting for me is that there's not going to be a debate or with Anders, because he never talked about genetic manipulation or... Yeah, but he was writing down when you were talking about superhumans. So my question is, would he ask? So let me answer. So he talks about implants, technology, but not about biological modification of human being, which is a different thing. But I'll answer and I'll give you the floor. Okay, we'll talk about it, but not before. But not in his presentation, he didn't mention it. So for a biologist, which is really important, are genes. So not genetic engineering, if we are going to become something else, if we are going to change or modify our nature. But I have to agree with you. If someone in a book would say, Harari or whoever, the way I see the future, there will be a few privileged people who would live wonderfully, and everyone else will be people who will just starve. People will say, well, I don't want that. I want to sign up for the revolution, because it will be a scandal. People will say, I don't want that future. We don't want that future. But people say that there are going to be some individuals that are going to be genetically modified who will be like super gifted, and everyone else will not know about anything because we will not. So maybe everybody knows that they are going to be the chosen ones. Okay, Anders.
There is a fundamental problem here. We can't envision a future where everybody is enhanced, because that's such a strange future. We can tell the story about the few being enhanced and the others not being enhanced. That's a good dramatic story. We can see the struggle. It makes sense from a literary and dramatic perspective. But I actually think it's very likely that we end up with a future that where most or everybody is enhanced. Just like practically everybody in this room have been vaccinated and educated and have a smartphone. And I think it's very likely that we might see the same thing with genetics. I think we have a fear that we get somebody else being the elite and we are not part of it, and that we don't want that. But in that case, we should just make sure we subsidize the genetic enhancement at the point when we actually think is good enough, because nobody really wants to subject themselves or the kids to be the guinea pigs.
Bueno, vamos a ver. Es que cuando se debate...
Yeah, but when we talk about these things, we make things that are ethically acceptable, that no one argues with changes in genetics that are addressed to something, that have a purpose. Of course, if you have a genetic disease, we all agree that a genetic modification is a benefit. No one's arguing that. What we're talking about is about changing the human being from the biological point of view to have a different human being. And my question for myself is, according to what criteria? What's the ideal of a human being? How will we decide how a human being, and who will decide how a human being needs to be?
My friend Todd Huffman has an implanted magnet in his finger. So it's not genetic engineering, it's a simple, trivial surgery. But he can sense magnetic fields. He got a sense that no other human, except other people with magnets, have. Is he a human being? I would say, yes, he's a human being because he's behaving like us, he's laughing at the same kind of jokes, etc. And I would imagine that somebody who was genetically engineered to be healthier and smarter would still be human. The changes that would make us different from human, they have to do with motivations, how we actually function internally, and they are much further off. And I don't think any parents would ever want a kid that wasn't human. They want more human. They want kids like them, but slightly better.
Bueno, podemos seguir con...
Well, we can continue with other questions, if you want. But from the biological point of view, it's not as easy, because to feel a magnetic field doesn't look like much. And if that's all that genetic engineering offers, to be able to feel a magnetic field, well, I have a compass that feels the magnetic field with a lot of precision. So I'm not really interested about that, but I would like to know about what genetics can offer that would represent an improvement, except on things that are merely moral, that they don't have a simple Mendelian heritage. So there's not a gene for being decent or for being honest. So literally that's not biological, that's make no biological sense. So we cannot reduce. So the thing is, where is the ethical limit, which is a social decision, I would guess. But if it's possible to genetically modify or to choose that our children, so they have no diseases, yeah, but I'm not arguing about that. But that's the beginning, let me tell you. Because if we can avoid to have some genetic diseases, and some studies say that maybe we can prevent baldness, is that frivolous? Or if it's possible, can we decide the color of the eyes of our children, or that they have a nice voice, a musical talent? because unavoidable. That would lead to what Juan Luis was saying, of just a few that at the beginning would be able to pay it until it becomes on that vaccine that everyone can access. Well, I think that you have to be very sick to be able to want to have kids with a given eye color. Yeah, but if it's genetically possible and if we're going to allow it. But imagine it's genetically possible. Imagine that any woman in this room is asked, how do you want to have your child? And they say, well, I would like to have them blonde with blue eyes. I think I'm saying before a sick person, mentally sick, because we don't have a model of children. How do you want it is? Let's see. So you have to be really screwed up in your head to have a model of a child and have me an a la carte kid, tall, dark hair, who can have a model of a human being on his hand. How do you see it, Anders?
So I think the mistake is to have a model of a child rather than thinking, what would be good for the child? If I were to have a kid, I want that kid to be having a long, healthy, happy life and be able to do in his or her life project. I don't care about the eye color. That's kind of beside the point. But I would, if I could do genetic engineering to ensure that, yep, they age slowly, they're smart, that would be good for them. No matter whether they wanted to go into art or science or just watch football. The thing is, it would generally be good. It's kind of good for most life projects. A kid that is genetically engineered to be a great tennis player is being forced by his or her parents into a particular career and might be most unhappy. And I'm hoping they rebel and become an artist instead. I think we should aim at things that are generically good. And most of that is fairly bland. It's nice things, but it's not going to be having green skin or being able to fly. That's something we hopefully should be able to do when we grow up, and then we use other techniques to do that.
Bueno, has utilizado la palabra inteligencia.
You use the word intelligence, and then we have to define what intelligence is. You said, I want my children to be intelligent. So what do you think is intelligence? Just to start with, because I don't even have a definition of intelligence. I don't know which one of my children is more intelligent. One is better with maths, another one dances better. So what is intelligence? So just to say that there's a measurement of intelligence, that human being can be measured according to the intelligence, I already think that that is worrisome, at least. So they're going to measure our intelligence. How are they going to define intelligence? What's intelligence?
As the ability to solve your problems in a general environment. And whether that is dance, football, or science, well, these are different environments. Now, how do you measure that? Most measures of intelligence are very limited. And I completely acknowledge that. That is why it's probably going to be tough to improve intelligence, and it's going to be much easier to improve things like health, which is probably going to be more acceptable too. But I do think it makes sense to speak of intelligence. It's just that it's much broader than we normally think, because normally we tend to assume intelligence is all about academic stuff, but it's much wider, as you say.
Bueno, no es fácil.
Well, it's not easy, genetics and intelligence. There's not a gene to be intelligent, just to start with, because that's the way development works. We're saying you're simplifying a lot. But let's say, I don't know if I'm explaining myself, but we're just going around the same thing. My point is, my approach is that there are not things as intelligence, just to start with. First, you have emotional intelligence, you have people who are really good with mathematics and then you cannot deal with them, or they're socially awkward. Throughout my life, which is not that long, when I was young, intelligent was the one solving mathematical problems really well. Now we believe intelligent is the one who can sell a second-hand car or a second-hand motorbike. That's intelligent, because mathematical problems are solved by a calculator machine. Anything, a cell phone can solve complex equations, but to sell the second-hand motorbike requires extraordinary skills. So we tend to think it's more difficult to sell a second-hand car than to have integrals in mathematics. So our model shifted. So what I want to say is, in the practical life, with my students, for instance, there are students that I see that are more motivated, ones are more interested about things, so they have less interest about what I'm talking about, but maybe they're more interested about what the next professor is talking about. There's nothing serious about. Some have more imagination, some, I don't know, have a photographic memory, or they would rather to write it down, or they're very good with computers. What I want to say is that human beings are genetics lottery is very good, because it's very well distributed, because you have your own gift, you have your punchline, and it's the way it's supposed to be. You dance well, you sing well, you're very funny, you're a great sports person. The important thing is for them to be good people, to be happy, and there is no gene to be a nice person. And just think about this. Eugenics, the people I introduced, Mueller for instance, or Huxley, these were anti-fascist, so they were communists. As a matter of fact, it's not just that they were not Nazis, it was the opposite. And what they were horrified about is about the world they were living in. They were so violent, and the eugenics they were thinking about was eugenics to make people better, with more solidarity. They were saying, okay, let's create a species that is more generous. But that is not in biology, it's not on the genes. If you want to say something, Anders, because we have questions from the public.
I think one good reason we don't like the word eugenics today is that it was imposed centrally. Both the fascists and communists kind of liked the central imposition of state goals on people, and that crushed human individuality. But I think actually the genetic lottery is still true even if your genes have been enhanced, because what you actually do of your life is much more than your genes. That's going to be how you interpret them, how you interact with your environment, and that's actually quite individual. You might hope for a good start, just like we want to give good nutrition to kids. That's not an imposition of the kids, forcing them to eat healthy food. We just know that, yeah, that's generally going to be good for you no matter what your life goes in. I think we're right in saying nobody should determine what genes my child has, but if we just randomize it, we're also being a bit irresponsible.
Nos pregunta Pepelu.
We have a question from Pepelu for Anders. Can we have like new senses with the development of technology? Can we have more senses than the 5 ones we have?
I already mentioned my friend Todd with the magnet, and another beautiful experiment was done on some colorblind monkeys, giving them by using gene therapy a new color. It's just an optical protein, and they could now solve these problems that you normally use to diagnose color blindness. So they experienced a new color. Unfortunately, we can't ask a monkey how it felt. But I'm so curious myself. I want to see new colors. I want to be able to see ultraviolet lights, to see the pattern of spring flowers. The amazing thing about the brain is that it doesn't seem to care too much what it's connected to. If you connect some neurons to an outside sensor of a new kind, it probably adapts to it unless the signals are too weird. So I think we could probably have quite radically different new senses. But the problem is you need to train yourself in using them. Todd, it took him a while to learn how to interpret his magnetic signals. The monkeys took a few weeks to handle the new color. So there is a fair bit of training, but I do think we can get much more senses. After all, we don't have 5 senses right now. We actually have quite a lot more. Internal chemical senses, proprioception, various smell senses, and I think we can experience so much more of the world.
Oh, yo creo que para clarificar.
To clarify, there's a radical difference in that, not between him and me, but we're talking about things that are quite different. On the one hand, if someone with his biological genetic mutation, the normal one that happens through genetic lottery from their parents who met and love, and that they make love one night or whatever, you know, genetic lottery, and then this person decides to have implants on the brain, and I think that's great. To have ultraviolet light, I'm not going to have a chip anywhere, but if someone wants to have cables on his brain because he wants to, he fancies to see ultraviolet lights. I'm not going to forbid that. What I'm opposed to is to plan that you already are born with genes that somebody else planified, somebody else planned. Because somebody else will be the state, scientists, who are the ones who know about it, parents. Well, I don't think parents will have a great knowledge about genetics. Yeah, because they can have a la carte baby. Well, yeah, but the parents will be able to have genetic advice because they will have no knowledge. But even if it's parents, to come into the world as a product of a design, having been designed by someone, that at the end of the day, the designing ones are the ones having the ability to do that, of course, and therefore is the system. That's a different thing. We can be in favor or against, but the different thing is that you are born and then you have some implants in the brain, and I have nothing to say about that. I'm not going to do it myself, but whoever can implant whatever they want on themselves. And a different thing will be to plan biology for the next generations, which could be good for some people, but I'm against. What I was saying is that within this, Hanari and other people who has this approach, not just something managed, like Anders was saying, like the dystopias from the 30s, but that the market may offer to their parents if you can pay for it. But for the parents, for the children, as Jose is. Yeah, for the families. Yeah, that's one of the approaches, and there are biologists who are saying, like you were saying, that there has to be an ethical code to clarify what you can and cannot do, as it was for the technologies throughout their development. But I think quite interesting, two questions for you, Juan Luis, from Carlos and Marta, about the idea of magical thinking. Carlos asks, what do you think it comes, why this idea? And Marta is asking, what is the impact of magical thinking on human evolution? Because it's a new religion, the religion of science. People stop believing. I mean, it's difficult for us, and I'm included in people, it's difficult for us to be a grown-up. It's really tough to be a grown-up. And we would like to be underage forever. So somehow, someone will decide for us to have the father figure, the state, religion, someone who will decide for one. And that's the magical thinking, that someone will perform miracles, that someone will perform a miracle, and this will be paradise through technology or through miracles. So that idea, that means being underage, not to accept your responsibilities. So just say it in a few words. Future of humanity goes through renouncing to things. To survive as a species, we need to renounce. We need to renounce to many things. That is, I believe more in renouncing than on miracle technology that will save us from the cul-de-sac where we are in right now. So the future is to be an adult, no more magical recipes, no more magical thinking, no more religions, not even the religion of science, not that as well. Let's be grown-ups. Let's face problems and let's solve them like problems are solved, by giving up to things.
But I also think being part of being a grown-up is not just to renounce magical thinking, but also to have visions, to actually wish for utopia, even though, you know, I'm not going to end up in utopia, but I might make things better. I think it's actually important to have this mixture. The magical thinking got us to build airplanes. We wanted to fly like birds. Yes. We still can't fly.
Queremos ser inmortales. Eso es pensamiento mágico.
That's, I want to be immortal. That's magical thinking. I want to be immortal.
If we were really adult, we would just let people die, but no, we want them to persist and live healthy lives, and we're pushing medicine, claro. And that is good, that's humane.
No, claro que queremos.
Of course we want to be immortals, of course we want that. That's the aspiration of wanting to be that makes it. Yeah, and someone promises us either in this life or the next life. And you were saying, Anders, that there was no time on your talk of the idea of downloading brains, and acquiring that immortality, not a physical one, but of data to become data. Can we call that, if that we want us to do that, will that be human?
I'd say if that were to work, that would be a demonstration of post-humans. They would be, in a sense, not just their own species, they would have entered the mineral kingdom. But I'm a computational neuroscientist. I'm interested in this topic. I've written a roadmap for it, but I don't expect it for a long time because it's very hard. Brains are complicated. We don't understand them very well yet. I'm probably unusually optimistic among neuroscientists, thinking that this might actually eventually work, but it's still going to take decades and decades of hard work. So my friends who want to be uploaded right now, they have to wait. So before that, I'd rather stay alive by finding ways of staying healthy. In the worst case, maybe I freeze myself. But I think the important part is these visions might look foolish eventually, but we learn a lot by having foolish visions and pursue them. We solve other problems. And I think that's important. That's, again, part of being a grown-up. Realizing that I was a bit childish yesterday. I'll try to do slightly better today.
Tenemos tiempo de un par de preguntas rápidas.
We have time for two quick questions. One's from Stefania, who's talking about those possible long futures. He's really interested about knowing the possibility of transhumanism to get to Mars. Is something that you're studying in the Center of Future of Humanity? Is something that you are investing money and effort in?
So our institute is not putting money into going to Mars, but we actually think about it because we do like Elon Musk a lot. And at the same time, we quite often facepalm when he says things. So his idea that we should become a multiplanetary species, I think, is great. That reduces the risk of us going extinct. I think it's a great goal. It's just that it's not the most cost-effective way of saving humanity. There are many other things that we can probably spend money on. However, I'm very glad that Elon is spending his money on trying to get to Mars. I think we're actually going to gain useful things from trying to go to space. Making enclosed ecosystems that can be self-sufficient would be super useful in arid regions on Earth. But if I wanted to get research funding for such a project, people say, that's beautiful, Anders, but you don't get any money. Saying, but in space, people throw money at it. This is ridiculous in many ways, but it means that if people develop useful technology for space that we can use on Earth, we should be doing it. Maybe in a saner world, we would start on Earth and then go to space, but we're not in a quite sane world. Similarly, automated manufacturing, mining very dilute elements, great for the environment, and if we can get the space people to pay for that and it makes sense down on Earth, wonderful, I'm all in favor of it. In the long run, we need to leave the cradle that is Earth, but in the short run, we have a lot of other things to do.
Tenemos tiempo para una pregunta rápida.
We have time for a quick question from the public. We have a hand over there. Thank you. Sorry, and another one to our right. But we'll start here and then we continue. Congratulations, all three of you, all from your own point of view. Very interesting. And the question is for Juan Luis mainly. So when you explain Harari's model regarding possible living together with different genetic base, I would like to go back to the past and ask about the hypothesis, because I believe it was 18,000 or 20,000 years ago when the American continent is colonized through the Bering Strait. What would have happened if the ones crossing, instead of being sapiens, would be Neanderthals or Denisovans, who were also around there? When in 1492 Colon arrives and finds installed that they could have survived colonies from Neanderthals, how do you think that would be accepted? Well, would have to sin. Let's see how you answer that in 1 minute. Neanderthals evolved from an independent way from us for 500,000 years at least. So we are sure that they were different from us. 500,000 years of divergent evolution is not a lot, if you would like to, but it's enough for being different. So I'm sure that it will be different. They will not be like us. They would have a different mindset, a different brain, and it would be great to see what other way of being human exists, because we believe that the only way of being human, and it's because of this debate, you can only be human in one single way, but probably, why not? You can be human in many different ways, future ways, invented ways, or past and extinguished. So I believe Neanderthals were humans, no doubt, but in a different way. And I would have loved to meet them. So thank you for the question. We have another one. I'm going to try to be quick. It's more of a comment. I don't know the name, but he was saying something about Freud. I study Freud, and what Freud said mainly, although it's very difficult to understand him, you have to study him in a group, so it's very difficult. So he was saying that inheritance, especially in a human being, is transmitted speech. So when he had genetics on his books, he was talking about to the genesis, to how it was generated, not to genetics, but to genesis. And he would reach the conclusion, Freud, that you cannot do anything with the human being. As you know, he was a neurologist from the beginning. And then when he discovered the inconscience, he became a psychoanalyst. But from the beginning, he wanted to find a psychical map of neurons, X, Y, and so on, and he found out that it was impossible.
To try to give a quick response, I think Freud was wrong about a lot of things, but I think he was right that, yes, we are generated by a process. The genes lay the groundwork of a building, but then you build the walls, and some of them are kind of put there by your parents, some of them, most of them hopefully, are made by yourself. And it's worth as a final parenthesis that Sigmund Freud actually in his early neuroscience work was looking at how neurons might connect together. Later, in 1949, Donald Hebb formulated what's called the Hebbian learning. But Freud was there decades before. If Freud had just published that paper, we might have talked about Freudian learning in our neural network and AI programs.
Pues me van a matar, pero voy a dar la palabra.
They're going to kill me, but with the promise of the question being 5 seconds and the question 15 seconds, just 1 second, because we need the mic. I work with children, and I'm worried if is there any study or something what won't happen in the classroom when kids start learning how to write and how to read without losing manual oculus, without taking the pencil and just using a keyboard.
Certainly my handwriting has become much worse since I started just typing. I can hardly read my own notes. Our brains are adaptive. They're built to be adapting to whatever body they find themselves in, whatever environment. And that, of course, means that if we can train ourselves up to a limit. There are things that we cannot make our brains do. That's where we might need various forms of enhancement and AI. But certainly, I think we need to experiment with training. Some forms of training might not be as important as we used to. We had a wonderful conversation about typewriting. And I have hardly used a typewriter, and I'm in awe of people who actually manage to use them for something real. And no doubt, kids of today would say, "Oh, Anders, you didn't talk to your computer. How did you ever write anything?"
Bueno, pues muchísimas gracias, Anders, y muchísimas gracias.
Thank you, Anders. Thank you, Juan Luis. It was fascinating to listening to you, and thank you all for your questions and for your attention. Thank you.